Hello, folks, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Financial Fitness with Patrick, presented by Soaring Media. And folks, we've been on a bit of a hiatus from the financial fitness perspective for the last little while. James and I were down in Orlando. We were putting a few things together, and as always, when you're checking out Soaring Profits, we always have something hot coming out of the oven for you. So what we've been doing the last little while with PodFest, working with the Healthcare Amplified Summit, was going down and interviewing people in very unique spaces. And James and I flying down from Canada into the United States and seeing what's going on in the market down there, seeing the differentiation between Canada and the United States. And I want to tell you right now, it is night and day. We've talked a little bit about Canada and where we are in the pre-recessionary process, as well as the United States with the inflation and deflation processes that are going on. And folks, the United States right now, when you look around, it seems like there's a lot of headwinds that are going on. Canada right now, we are on the verge of recession. We are looking at, I would arguably, we are going to look back in time here and see that we are currently in a recession. GDP is not keeping up. We're looking at the QQQs over the last week or two here that have pulled back, and then we had this skyrocket with the NVIDIA earnings over the last 24 and 48 hours. And this is what's propping up the economy. We've talked the market, not the economy. I apologize. They're two very different things, and we've talked about that before. Main Street versus Wall Street. And the Main Street economy right now, we're seeing where people are a little bit tighter. The consumer is being threatened with their interest rates on their loans. We're seeing those starting to pull back up after a large decrease since the November Fed meeting with Jerome Powell. These are all headwinds that are going to come into the economy. So we have to be diligent in what we're doing. NVIDIA was a saving grace last night. We had the after-hour earnings report that came out, and to be honest with you, I wasn't overly impressed with what we saw. They had a beat. They were impressive in regards to the fact that they beat the expectations of Wall Street. But was this a situation where they continued their growth trajectory? Not at all. And when you have a growth story like NVIDIA, where over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've seen hundreds of % growth, that growth story is slowing dramatically. They have to figure out what's going to be next. Are competitors coming? What are the headwinds that are facing them? Maybe it's just the law of large numbers. When you get to that market cap, it's hard to continue doubling. But when we look at the market and we look at the mainstream, there's a big disconnect. People are hurting. People in the Main Street are feeling like their dollar's not going as far anymore. Wall Street's doing fantastic, right? You can call it Bidenomics. You can, however politically you want to angle that. But there's a lot of pain on Main Street. And this is where our guest today, Richard Parker, comes in a fantastic way. Richard is a gentleman who has, since the age of 12 years old, has been an entrepreneur, multi-time himself, but more importantly is helping people start their own businesses. And that's where it's not, Richard will speak about this, but it's not just something for, a select group of people to be entrepreneurs and business owners. And he's a fantastic host of Business Buying Banter with Deb Curtis, who was a guest on Soaring Profits. Richard, welcome, pal.
Thank you. Good to be here, and I appreciate you having me. I didn't realize you're in Canada. Where in Canada are you?
We're about an hour outside of Toronto. We're kind of in the cottage country area, James and I. So
What's the cottage country? I grew up in Montreal. So.
Oh, there you go. So we're in the Peterborough area.
Okay.
Yeah.
I lived in Toronto for a year. Lived in Sudbury. Lived in Saskatchewan. So
bouncing all over.
Bouncing all
Where
over.
are you now?
I'm in Southeast Florida. I live in Boca Raton, Florida, which is between Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach on the East Coast.
Just coming back from Orlando, your weather, sir, I can get down with that.
It's very easy to get used to. I certainly don't. And I still play ice hockey 3 times a week, although I blew out my knee. So I'm off.
I love that. And coming from Montreal, you would notice it. Montreal, for those of you that don't know, Ottawa, Montreal, it may as well be Antarctica in the winter. It's
brutal. Montreal is like a Buffalo winter. So for people,
yes.
In America, it's very similar to that. And I'm a big Bills fan. I used to go to every game when I lived up there.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's terrible.
No, I'm good with it. Don't worry about it. It's my logo for the Bills is been tearing my guts out since 1976, but that's okay. I keep telling myself it builds character.
So I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. So I talk.
So you're in no position. You're in no position.
Exactly.
Next.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Richard, first of all, thank you again so much for being here today.
Of course.
We've had a couple meetings back and forth to try to put this together. I appreciate you coming. So richardparker.com is your website. You do coaching. You've written some literature. You got 100,000 books sold. Clearly, you're doing something right. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about where your journey first started at 12 years old. You had me beat by 5 years. I'm usually one of the younger guys when I walk in a room and say that I started my first business at 17. I usually get a little bit of clout with that. At 12 years old, what were you doing and what sparked that initial love of entrepreneurship to where you are now?
Well, 12, by 17, I had two of them under the belt. One sold.
I
So
love it.
yeah, I always say I started the first one at 12 and sold it profitably at 13. Still very proud of it. And that was a newspaper route actually, but not a traditional newspaper route. This was a Sunday Express, which people used to have to buy at the stores locally when I grew up. It was a cheap paper, like 15 cents. And I'm really aging myself by that. But
You and Warren Buffett.
me and Warren Buffett, right? And he's still a little older than me, but not by much. And so they used to have to buy it at the local store, and then I actually got in touch with someone on the Express and convinced them to give it to me on a delivery basis, and I would go out and solicit people to try to get more people onto the route, and as you say in Canada, route, that's a route in Canada in the U.S. And was very successful doing that. They were actually quite stunned. And then I suddenly found myself like going from 0 to 100, then 200, then 300, then like 500 people. Wow. Who were subscribing to this, and was delivering the papers on Sunday, which was killing me because it's carrying all the papers. And then I started giving these the routes to kids in my neighborhood with the following deal: when the paper sold at 15 cents, you'd go in and you'd collect during the week, and people would give you a quarter and let you keep the change. And then what happened was the price went up to 20 cents, and so they still give you the same quarter. So my profits dropped by 50%. However, the newspaper, Sunday Express, paid the carrier, the delivery boy, 2 cents a piece. So what I did was I sold off everything but like probably 50. Didn't sell them off. I gave them away to kids in the neighborhood with the understanding that you guys keep the tips, I get the 2 cents.
Gotcha.
And it was crazy. Like at 12 years old, I had more money than anybody.
I love that.
Yeah, so it was great.
The tax man need not know about it, and
still
you just
doesn't know.
Run right through a cash business.
Still doesn't know. Still doesn't know. I'm reading Al Capone's the biography of Al Capone now, and how they nailed him all eventually on tax evasion. It's a great book. But and thinking, yeah, Big Al and I we didn't report anything. Correct.
Absolutely.
So it changed a little bit over the years, Phil.
Yeah, well, yeah, the business model, I think what he got into post might be slightly different, but hey, at the end of the day, profit is profit, and you got to run with it from there.
Profit is profit, right?
So Richard, you started 12 years old. You build that entrepreneurial spirit, and I look around, in today's society and where people are and young people, and we live in this instant gratification society. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Well, keep following YouTube, but the rest of them maybe you can get rid of. But all of these young people that are coming into entrepreneurship, you're now a mentor. You're helping them jump into some of these spaces. You're probably seeing their parents first, but when you're discussing the product that you're offering, the coaching, the books, all that sort of thing, what advice do you have for the younger people, the children, before they even getting to like their adult self? How can children now set themselves up for an appropriate entrepreneurial endeavor?
Well, the first thing that I try to convey to people without coming across as an old fart is they have to understand they got to pay their dues.
Right.
Because there's too much instant gratification. And when you start looking at all social media, which I happen to call anti-social media in a lot of respects, it's very easy to get sucked into this idea that success is around the corner, and all these influencers, a lot of them are full of shit, pardon my French. Absolutely. But it's very easy for a young mind to get the impression that making money, being successful is easy, and it's also easy to get. They're always also very impressionable as far as thinking that that's all there is, because there's a lot more to life that they'll learn over time. And I don't want to be, dictating to them per se, but they need to understand that you can never avoid paying your dues. Yeah, there's some of those influencers and some of these people that, through technology have knocked it out of the park in a very short period of time. But that's really the rare exception. You have to plod your way along on a good path. And when I say pay your dues in the world where I operate, which is teaching people how to buy existing businesses, is there's a process and procedure that you got to follow. And whether it's in my world or any universe, if it's, you're looking to get into a particular field, working wise, you got to start at the bottom and work your way up, and because it's much easier than starting at the top and working your way down. And this paying the dues idea, I think we've become very polluted, and I don't want to get overly political or overly dramatic, but I think there's been, just with the influence of social media, there's just way too much misinformation as far as what it takes to be successful. Because you show me any entrepreneur, line up 100 or 100,000 entrepreneurs, and there'll be the odd exception of someone who became successful overnight. But by and large, it's been a battle. There's been a bunch of failures. You've got to be resilient. You got to have lots of grit. You're going to screw up a few things, and you got to dust yourself off and get going. And it's hating to overuse an analogy, but it really is a marathon. I mean, it's definitely not a sprint, and knowledge is the basis of everything. So whether you're buying businesses or trying to improve your career or real estate investing, you have to learn. You got to learn before you can earn.
Absolutely, Richard. And so with what you've done with Deb Curtis, again, who was on our show here with Business Buying Banter, you folks have put this podcast, this video podcast together that is doing just that. You're bringing sort of the buying aspect. She's bringing some of the finance aspect, and you're marrying the two together in a really concise way. I was on your show earlier today making some comments, jumping in there, because I think what you guys are doing is fantastic. There's not enough information out there. And that's what we're trying to do with financial fitness is, like I explained to you when we first started, is there's a lot of information in YouTube finance. And I hate to say it, but YouTube, if you want to build a shed, people are going to YouTube. You want to remodel your bathroom, you're going to YouTube. Finance in YouTube is a new tool. And for people like ourselves that are trying to hit that middle ground, it's not buy your first home, it's not buy your first car, not get your first credit card, and it's not extreme technical analysis of, ETFs, right? Whatever jargon you want to throw out there. You folks are fitting that middle ground where you're saying, folks, this is accessible to you. You have an opportunity. These businesses are opening, they're running every day, and for the right dollar figure, you can put yourself in the place of Mr. Smith or Mrs. Jones, and you can take over their existing business. You folks said something really interesting and important today when I was on your listening to your show, and it was skip the startup.
Yes.
So you folks are saying you don't need to do the blood, sweat, and tears from the ground up. Find a business and procure it at the appropriate value. But how do people find out that appropriate value? What are some keys that kind of takeaways that they can do to find that vetting process?
Well, the first thing is, yes, I believe if you can skip the startup process, sometimes you can get into a startup for less money or a side hustle, but that's a part-time gig, right? But if someone is looking to replace an income, generate an income, or get into the world of entrepreneurship, as you alluded to, acquiring businesses is very doable. I'm a guy, I started with very, very little money, and I'm not giving you some rags to riches story, although ultimately that's what happened. At a few bucks, I ended up acquiring a company. I'll give you the backstory at some point if you'd like. But if you do this the right way, there's a couple things. Number one, it's attainable by anybody. You just have to be open-minded, willing to learn, and walk through a process properly. That's number one. Number two, if you do this in a good way, here's the reality of it. When you buy an existing business, and I'm not someone who talks about buying distressed businesses or garbage businesses, right, and I'm certainly not someone who's spewing bullshit on the internet that you can buy businesses cash flowing $250,000 with no money down and close the deal in a couple of days. I breathe oxygen from this planet and deal in reality in practical terms. But if you do this the right way, you get the keys to the place on Monday, you take a paycheck on Friday. And that's not BS. I mean, that is the reality, and that's the goal. And from a leverage standpoint, there's lots of great leverage. You know, people who, if anybody who listened to the show with Deb understands that in the United States, you have financing such as SBA financing, which provides a lot of leverage. I've been teaching and preaching seller financing for 34 years. 91% of our clients get seller financing. The percentage of how much they put down varies, but these are very leverageable deals. They're very laden with performance laden deals, especially now because the economy has had some ups and downs, so it's hard to get a real beat on value. And so that's the first part of your question, which is it is doable. I can assure you. I mean, if I've done it, and I'm not the smartest guy in the room by any means, don't have a college education, I've done this 14 times and bought businesses from $50,000 to over 200 million. So I promise you, this is doable. Yep. The second part is related to value, and value is a combination of science and art. And so you start out, one challenge early on for people that are uninformed or misinformed is in the lower market is sellers will often publish an asking price. And I just wrote an article for Forbes saying, disregard the asking price. The asking price has no relevance whatsoever. What a seller thinks their business is worth rarely, if ever, has anything to do with the value, because they've got blood, sweat, tears, or you're Canadian, I'll say blood, sweat, and beers, right? They got blood, sweat, and beers invested, and so they don't have any logic attached to it. Like they close their eyes or to get Stevie Wonder to throw the darts, and they figure out here's what I'm asking, the asking price is. So it's got to fit into financial parameters of what makes sense on a return on investment, and you should be able to get at least 25 to 33% return on your cash investment. There's no question about that. So when you add in, it becomes a little complicated related to formulas. I don't want to get over mathematical, but the valuation, I've been doing this for 34 years and put together a valuation program which factors in 50 characteristics of the business, fundamentals of the business, not just financial things about competitors, the overall marketplace, what the deal terms look like, whether you're getting more financing or there's more cash up front, what type of threats, customer concentration, key employees, etc. And we marry all those answers in and give them a certain weight, and that gets attached to the profits of the business, or what are called adjusted earnings, and it spits out a valuation, and that's worked incredibly well. And there's a lot of room on valuation, a lot of room. Absolutely. And especially now, there's so many markets. There's so many people going to be retiring in the next little while, and I want to touch upon a company that I was working with actually in Canada that's sponsoring some individuals to buy businesses, and it's called the silver tsunami. So a lot of times the motivation of the seller weighs into the valuation as well, and the fit with the buyer. They want to see someone continue the legacy, and so there is a lot more flexibility.
Absolutely, Richard. And I think you bring up a huge aspect there with the baby boom generation retiring, right? We're seeing, we in Canada, we had the brain drain of the 90s. We saw our doctors, we saw our people go down to the States for opportunities. Now we're seeing plumbers, we're seeing electricians, we're seeing all of these opportunities that are coming out. Those people are now looking to sell off. And is there somebody coming to replace them? And these are for people out there that are looking to buy businesses. This does not have to be your franchise model. This doesn't have to be a Domino's pizza. This can literally be a plumbing business, an electrical business, a landscaping business, like you brought up earlier today. These options out there, again, you guys did a fantastic show, and I really enjoy watching you guys. And a little shout out to Business Buying Banter, because you frame it so well. And everyone you're talking with, if you are in the business to be doing this, you want to be moving on to that entrepreneurial side of your life. Maybe you've been in corporate. Maybe you're in a situation that you're working for some of these tech companies over the last 2 years, and you find yourself out of a job as they're, deflating their costs, right? That's what's kind of propping up our stock market. And kind of what I was talking about at the very beginning in my opening, it was in regards to the Main Street versus Wall Street. And Richard, you are Main Street. You're making sure that the trains run on time in what you're building and helping people build in businesses. Wall Street is disconnected right now. And those equilibriums often snap back in big ways, whether one side or the other. And I think we're coming up to that. However, where we are in Canada, when we see these opportunities for these, I'm going to call them mom and pop type businesses, maybe 25, 30 employees, maybe, under $50 million in revenue. These people are looking to exit. They're looking to figure out what's next in their life. And if you can come to them with a plan, the owner financing aspect, and Deb, she's talked about this in a lot of great ways, going through the SBA,
Small Business Administration. Yep.
The SBA loans are fantastic, but I'm a real estate guy. So I have a multifamily portfolio that I have. We are seeing more and more and more deals where seller financing are coming.
Of course.
And a lot of that is coming off the the commercial loans. People are trying to figure out what's next. The rates are getting so ridiculous in regards to, we got to chase yields. We got the interest rates running up. People are now refinancing these commercial debts. We've got a bit of a commercial debt crisis that's coming down the pipe, and Canada is getting hit very hard. If you can come up with somebody, whether you're purchasing, the plumbing shop, the electrical shop, these trades, if you can work in it, that's fantastic. But you also don't have to, right, Richard? You can put people in place of managerial processes. Maybe you can talk about finding those people. How do you put good people in good positions to manage once you take over an organization?
Okay, well, you have a couple of questions there. So the first one is related to, interest rates and these deals in seller financing. We're seeing them now when they used to be, seller financing used to be at the very low end, and now I'm seeing them in deals. I do some seller representation or lower market investment banking, and where I'm seeing them in deals that I'm doing now, that businesses that are selling for $50 million, because it's the only way to bridge the gap between what the banks will lend. They used to lend at turns, turns of EBITDA. So they used to lend at 3 to 4 times turns of EBITDA, and now they're lending at 1 to 1.5. So someone's got to bridge that gap, and it's coming with sellers. There was one big transaction, a seller's carrying a $750 million note. So it is happening. As I mentioned earlier, I've been teaching and preaching this for decades. 91%.
Now, Richard, if you don't mind, if I could stop you for a second. So what the bank's not willing to finance that additional value, and the seller coming in to bridge that, are they willing to do it simply because the terms are agreeable to them? Like, because we're
no, they're willing to do it, because if not, they're not going to get the deal closed.
That's it. It boils down to that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get to the finish line, I mean, the banks, Canada and the United States, irregardless of the geography, banks typically do not lend money for small business acquisitions. They do have programs like, the SBA programs, and there's some other programs in Canada, not as robust, but there are some. But banks, if you look at their ads on TV, you think they're sitting there with the vaults open waiting for you to buy a business, and it's just not going to happen. And so, the only way to get these lower end deals to the finish line is seller has to provide financing. And from a buyer's perspective, I mean, it's truly the only way that you can get the seller to validate everything that they've represented. I bought a number of companies. I would never buy a business without a component of seller financing ever, unless I was stealing the company. When I say stealing the company, that I knew the business and business sector intimately and could buy it at a massive discount related to paying cash. And so that absolutely is a requirement. Now, as far as the second part of your question related to mom and pop businesses, and that gives us a pretty wide scope, because you do have the Main Street, laundromats up into businesses doing $50 million. But let's talk a, decent business, like you said, 25, 30 employees, a business throwing off a few $100,000 to a couple of $1 million, right? And so to your question about whether you have to be a plumber or electrician to buy it, here's the key thing. Irrespective of the size of the business, if you're going to be a buyer of a business, it varies differently from buying real estate. If you buy a multi-family location and you overpay for that, Patrick, right? You just, for whatever reason, you overpaid, not on purpose. You pay too much. Well, as long as you can service the debt, we know, and you're a young guy, we know that time heals every real estate error. Yeah. Right? Okay, so you just have to be able to service the debt and hold on to it long enough. Eventually, it's going to go up.
Time in the market, right?
Time in the market. You got to stick with it. So as long as you can service the debt, you're good. In a business, is very different. There's a much bigger upside in a business, meaning for every businesses sell at multiples. In that range, we're talking about 3 to 5 times. Let's call it 4 to make the math easy. So every dollar of value you add to the business, you get 4 out at the end, you squeeze out at the end when you sell the business. However, until that time, you got to operate the business. And if you're not the right person to operate the business, if you, Patrick, overpaid for that multi-family property, you're able to service the debt. In a year from now, the property is still standing. In 5 years from now, its property is still standing, as long as you can sustain the debt. In a business, you buy the wrong business, you're going bankrupt. And end of story. This is binary. This is math. If you're the wrong, but it really is. So the key element here is you have to make sure you're the right person for the business. Your skill set marries perfectly to the business. If you want to buy it as an investment and have people in place that are running the business, that's all wonderful. If you have gobs of money, you could make a few mistakes. If you don't, then what you have to make sure is you have to get in there at the beginning and learn that business. Because if you don't learn that business and you have a manager in place and that manager gets hit by a truck or decides to quit or become a competitor, you don't even know who to hire or how to hire. And so you've got to get the guts of the business in your belly. You can plan for exiting or extracting yourself or spending less time over time. And that's a wonderful position because it makes it even more sellable in the future. But make no mistake, I would never mislead anybody and tell them you can go buy these businesses and not operate them and operate them absentee, because absentee business ownership usually equals absentee profits. And furthermore, if you have a job and you're running and have an absentee run business, and all of a sudden the manager quits or there's a big problem there, well, what are you going to do? Just leave your job and go manage the distribution business for the next 3 weeks? You can't do it. So you've got to be in this all the way, and you've got to learn the business. You've got to immerse yourself, because it's the only way you can make good decisions. And the whole goal of getting into your own business is to control your own destiny. So why would you want to go into a business and then put pardon my French, put your balls in someone else's hands that they squeeze and you're out of business? So
absolutely,
so it's
Richard,
doable, but you want to do it in a good way.
So what do you think about franchises? And again, we're coming into a time where there's been some market liquidity around. Real estate values have been fairly prolific in Canada, especially. We've seen basically a doubling, right, of our real estate values over the last little while. And you're seeing individuals willing to take out the credit against their home, whether that is a brilliant decision or not.
It could be. It's very
sure.
popular.
The risk aspect is where I'm looking at now. So in Canada, for instance, and kind of a brief segue and then come back to my question. But in Canada, we've seen housing prices over the pandemic absolutely double. Like everywhere in Canada, you have seen a doubling of your real estate value. And over the last 6 months, we've seen a drawback probably 20 to 25%.
Okay.
So individuals now are finding themselves where they are extremely levered, right? And we're seeing the rates continue to rise. We're seeing the debt obligations that are going into the individuals themselves skyrocketing. Inflationary expenses are getting crazy. These are real problems that are hitting home. Walking into a systems-driven franchise, we're seeing all of the restaurants pop up that are across Canada, right? These franchises seem very cookie cutter, easy to maintain. You can put in a manager and run. Are they a safe investment from your perspective, or are you still having to dive in there, or are you better to go to, Tim the electrician, learn the business? I'm not saying you need to become, Sparky and putting in electrical outlets or anything like that. But
if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to become Sparky.
That's it, right? Yeah. But trying to figure out, is there a model to take the boomers' opportunities as opposed to going in and buying a Subway or a McDonald's or these more mainstream?
So I like the idea of franchises very much for certain people, especially anyone who doesn't have the confidence, operational experience. You don't need a ton of operational experience because businesses, it's much harder to raise kids than it is to run a business. But trust me, I got 4 of them, so I know. So for franchises, you have to come up with this, look at this from the following perspective. First of all, franchise versus non-franchise. You got to decide what's important, which is control or support. In a franchise business, you have lots of support and no control, because you have to follow the rules of the franchise. That's why franchise is successful, even if it's to your own detriment. Even if you open up a UPS drop store and 3 blocks down the road, UPS sells another one, you get all pissed off, but it's actually better for the brand because it's raising awareness. So it's the idea of support and control. If you're someone who doesn't necessarily need as much support and you want the control, not that you have to be a control freak, I'm not saying that, but you want the control of the business, then a non-franchise business is the one for you. I like to question things. I like to keep testing marketing. A franchise is definitely not for me unless I own 100 of them. I do own, through a co-investment, 118. I do currently own 118 Taco Bells and Applebee's, so I'm very familiar with the franchise model. But if I was buying one particular unit, for my persona, it wouldn't be the right thing, but for a lot of people, it is. But what I do like about franchises, what I recommend to people, if through your, let's say, to get into entrepreneurship, to gain your confidence, to get some operational comfort because you can do that following the manual, you'll come out a better person and a better operator in a few years from now. What I like to do is marry the best of both worlds, and I recommend that people buy franchise resales. So then you get the best of an existing business, because a new franchise sounds wonderful, but you're putting up a new building, and all you've got at that point is the idea that this is a concept that has worked to a certain extent in certain areas over a certain period of time, but there's no guarantee that the new location is going to be any good, even though they do all kinds of demographic research. So go take the best of both worlds, buy an existing franchise, maybe a little bit of a premium, but not much.
Right.
Okay, not much. It really isn't. And then you've got a franchise that you could already dig into that actual business's books and records and performance. Yeah. And so you've got the franchise that you're the right person for that franchise, and you've got an ongoing concern. It's generating revenues. People are walking through the door the day you open, the day you have the keys to the place.
Absolutely. Well, and I also think that there's a lot of homework that can be done in going to your franchises first.
Yep.
You might not have any experience in entrepreneurship, but when you call up a Mr. Sub, and I bring that up because that's a Canadian company that my family was a part of.
Is it Mr. Sub or Mr. Sub, eh?
Mr. Sub, yeah.
Yeah, Mr.
We
Sub,
had we had a couple franchises that we were looking to put in the Collingwood area, resort community, Blue
Know
Mountain.
it well. Yep.
Absolutely beautiful area. And we were going in. This is the time that they were going into Max Milk convenience stores, marrying the two brands. So my family at the time was looking to do that. They were looking to do it between Collingwood proper, the city, and Blue Mountain, the resort community, which is about a 10-minute drive, very small commute. And we're like, this is brilliant. We're going to put one in right here. We got everything set. They doubled up on us and put one in Collingwood and in Blue Mountain before we get the deal done. And we looked at it and we're like, well, clearly you don't want our business. This is, this is the franchise model. They were in a big expansion push. It was what it was. However, we learned a lot about the food industry in a small community, right?
Correct.
We knew numbers. We knew everything that was going on. And we were able to look at that market segment and we pivoted. My family actually went into the Collier World paint and decorating business. And we had a number of franchises.
Collier World. I remember that. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Owned by Para Paints. They ended up being a distributor for Home Depot here when Home Depot came into the United States, into Canada. So for us, my father was a multi-time entrepreneur. He was a cowboy. My father was my hero. And that was his first foray into a real business model, right? And to him, it was always trading off the back of the truck tailgate. Whatever he had going, we were
Sounds good.
Well, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get into the corporate world and it was different. My dad was, in fact, a horse trader. He could do that. He was also a hoisting engineer by trade. He had two polar opposite approaches. But when he got into the corporate side of it, he needed some hand-holding. It was different. And that's where it seems like what you do is kind of marrying that together, is that you can take that horse trader with a lot of drive, give him some of that information that you're doing in your materials, your courses, your literature, and really put something together for them. Richard, your books, 100,000 sales on your book. That's a fantastic number. Like that's a milestone. Congratulations.
Thank you.
When people are coming to you looking for that information, how do they come to you? Like, we have your website down in the bottom there. Fill out some information, purchase the book, get the book. What sort of things can we find in that literature?
Well, the thing that was most important to me, and I'll just give you a little bit of context to this. I went through a failed transaction, and that when I say failed, I backed out of the transaction because when I started digging into the financials, it was like a big plate of spaghetti, and that really spawned my interest into what the average person does who's looking to buy a business, who didn't have the benefit of me doing it all these years. I mean, I'm not that smart. I've just been doing it a long time, and so you know what to look for. And I couldn't I realized that I would never figure out how to figure this deal out. Right. And so I backed out of the deal, and that led me to a year of research into the market, speaking with individuals who had bought businesses, other ones who failed to buy businesses, business brokers, lenders, banks, attorneys, accountants. And the numbers were staggering as to people who 94% of the people who begin the search to buy a business never complete a transaction. And so I had hundreds of files of businesses that I looked at, and I said, I want to put this into a course for people. And this was even before the heydays of the internet, if you will. And it's been updated constantly since, of course. And I wanted to put this as more to memorialize what I've been doing, but I wanted to do it in a way I always felt. I had bought some information products over the years from TV, Tony Robbins, Carlton Sheets, real estate, sure. Right? And they were really, really good, except what I found was, if you don't take it upon yourself to do it, number one, the most important thing, there's no real hand-holding. Like, here's a pile of information. I'm not saying Tony Robbins' course way back when was phenomenal, right? It was eye-opening. So I'm just using that as an example, but there was no real hand-holding. And I said, what I want to do is, my goals are very simple. Number one, I wanted to just help one person. That was my goal. I wanted to memorialize everything. The night before we launched online, my wife asked me, how many do you think you're going to sell? I told her, if I only sell one and I help one person buy the right business or avoid buying the wrong one, that's good enough for me. I never thought it would turn into a business. And it's really written in a course. It's not a book. It's a course that breaks down the business buying process, which isn't difficult, but it's complex. And it breaks it down into 23 modules and walks people through each of the steps in the following overarching theme, which is, it teaches people what they need to know. It explains to people what they have to do and exactly how to do it. So it's when this happens, you do that. When that happens, you do this, for each of the various stages, covering the entire buying process. And one of the things that was very important to me, I didn't do this for the money. I still don't do it for the money. I mean, if I never sell another program, it makes no difference to my life. My agenda was and always remains is I just, want to help people because I've been really blessed in my life and accomplished things that, from this punky little Sunday Express delivery entrepreneur,
Love it.
right?
Yeah.
To, buying businesses over $200 million. Pretty crazy. And so the hand-holding piece was really important to me. I did a lot of consulting for many years and I charged, quite a bit of money, and I don't charge anymore. I actually do it for free. So to me, it was the hand-holding piece because no matter how good the information is, and I stand by it, it's fantastic, fantastic information because it's practical and it's real world and it's proven. People still run into particular issues, unique issues when you're doing a transaction. I mean, I'm doing this for 34 years. I still learn something in every deal. And so the hand-holding piece was really important to me. So I let people, anybody who buys our course, and it's really, again, I don't want to sound like an infomercial, but we sell the whole thing for under $200.
Yeah.
But anybody who buys our course, they can email me anytime. I answer questions. I'm on email all day long. You have bought our course and you have a question that I need to explain to you in more detail. I'll get on the phone. I'm on the phone with countries all over the world every day from people because we've sold our course into 86 countries. And so the hand-holding piece was really, really important to me because information is great as long as you do something with it. But there are situations that you need some help. And I know the challenges that people face during the business buying process. And it is exciting and it is scary and certain things that they don't know where to look for the answers. So for me, it was like this was a labor of love. And I never thought it would turn into a business. So when we initially published it and was self-published, if you had told me we were going to sell 10 of these, I'd think you're nuts. If you told me we were going to sell 100, I think you're smoking crack. And if you told me we were going to sell 100,000 of these, I'd say, the drug hasn't been invented yet that you're using, right? So it's mind-boggling to me, and it's wonderful because it's you have tens of thousands of people whose lives have been changed, and it's when I get up in the morning and I get a testimonial from someone who says, "Mr. Parker, you changed my life," that's pretty good stuff.
Richard, I want to thank you so much, pal. You are exactly what we're trying to do here with financial fitness, is bringing on experts, hearing what they have to say. There's a motivational side, but there's also a fundamental side. You can have all the motivation you want, like you were saying. You can have all the information you want, but you have to have some actionable things. And it sounds like you guys are doing that the right way. So folks, check out richardparker.com as well with Business Buying Banter with Deb Curtis. These are great people. They're doing amazing stuff out there in the world. And this is not a scam. These people they're tires on the ground. This is rubber meeting the road type situation. Richard, last question before we go. I got a 14-year-old daughter, bit of an upstart. She's pretty good.
Good luck to you.
Yeah, I know, right? That's the problem. But as dad, what advice do you have for a young female entrepreneur in today's society?
Number one, I think it's very advantageous to be a female entrepreneur, especially for my daughters. They're both professionals. But had I advised them if they wanted to get into the world of entrepreneurship, I would tell them to get into a male-dominated industry. Right. And the reason why I say that is every female that I love working with female clients, by the way, because I tell you one thing, they're actually much smarter than guys because they'll listen.
She tells me that all the time.
Trust me, I've been married twice. I know that drill. So they're and the way to say smarter, they're better business buyers because they're more open-minded and they know they're going into scenarios oftentimes where it's the old boys network. So they've got to be sharper, right? And so they don't just blow smoke up their own rear end. They make sure they're sharper going into the meetings. The other thing is when I say a male-dominated world, every female that I've had as a client that's gone into a male-dominated industry, construction, renovation, plumbing, electrical, whatever it may, anything financial where it's male dominated, has done unbelievably well. The reason being is because they have to work twice as hard.
Right.
And so I would say, if you want to cut your teeth, go into a male dominated industry. The other part of that, which is really important, there's a tremendous number of female consumers and female business owners now. And female consumers and female business owners, if you're selling B2B, prefer to deal with females.
Absolutely.
And so if you put a combination together of being in those male-dominated areas, especially if you're in industry in a male-dominated area where the female makes the decision, which, for example, very often in home services, Absolutely. Right? The husband's not doing it. I sit there, I write the check, right? But the woman's, a housewife or mother or wife is making the purchase decision. They feel much more comfortable dealing with a woman.
I agree. Yeah.
So that's my advice. And the other piece of advice that I give your 14-year-old daughter, which is really important, listen to your father.
You heard that. Richard, again, pal, I thank you so much for joining us. Get in touch with Richard. When we go back into the green room, I've got a couple things that maybe I'll pitch you here when we get out of here and we'll see if we can put a deal together.
Okay,
Folks,
man.
thank you again for joining us. Financial Fitness presented by Soaring Profits, and we'll see you again next time. Let's make some money together, folks.